And Reese is out of
I think
town.
everybody's there now.
Tom,
Which one is Andy?
I'm here.
Andy's right there.
he's on. His face is on.
There he is.
And Tom is here.
Yeah.
Tom's on.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 3 o'clock, so I will call the meeting to order. This is the June 15th meeting of the Sonoma County Library Commission Finance Committee. And I need to do a roll call vote. So Barbara McKenzie,
Yes, here.
Andy Elkin,
Here.
Tom Hauser,
Here.
Deborah Doyle,
Here.
and myself, Randall Neff. I'm the chair of the committee. So, we have a lot of people here today. Okay, I would like to remind the additional commissioners that may be attending that under the Brown Act, you can't talk. So, sorry. Other announcements. Regarding the curbside service, I went and reviewed the joint powers agreement that we have. And basically in there, it says that all the branches need to have the baseline number of hours with the exception of Central. So I want everyone to think about that. And we need to get curbside out to everybody. Are there any other announcements? Okay, public appearances. Jean, you said you had no written.
No, there are none.
Okay, are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Please keep it less than 3 minutes. I don't see anybody, so we will continue onward. There's nothing on the consent calendar. There's no action items by motion. So we move down to 6.1, the monthly finance reports, which start on page 4 of the packet. And Jody, you're on. Unmute.
Thank you for that reminder. I was just about to start talking. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay. This first page is just some narrative letting you know that we received 2 Measure Y payments in the month of May. One was $859,000, and that was labeled February of 2020, and another that was not labeled but is likely March 2020 in the amount of $723,000. The total of those 2 receipts is $1.5 million. What this means is that for the last 2 quarters, I have not been transferring, for example, payroll amounts or services and supplies amounts into Measure Y because I was afraid we would run out of money. Now I can begin, now that we've got some funds in there. We've received no further sales tax as of this morning. The detailed budget that I need to provide to the county is due June 25th. So the commission meeting will not have happened at that time. So the budget as recommended by you today is what I will fill out and give to the county. And then if there are changes at the commission meeting, I can make those as budget adjustments in the same system. I have meetings coming up this week with both the library's auditors and with CalPERS, one to talk about our valuation of our retirement, and the other to go over remaining needs and get this audit finished up. Okay.
That's a question about CalPERS.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is Barbara. I wanted to ask about the CalPERS valuation. We had a CalPERS expert calculation thing done. It was either last year or the year before. What do you expect to get out of this meeting from the CalPERS folks? What are you looking for?
What they need from me.
Okay, so you're not expecting to get any updated information about our CalPERS
No.
liabilities or payments or any of that kind of stuff?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. Are we planning to use the same audit firm for the next audit?
You know, I'll have to look at their contract. I'm not sure if their contract was multi-year when they signed it. I don't have any problem using them again, but that would be dependent on what their contract says. If it's not in their contract that they would do this next year's audit, we may have to go out to bid. For that. So here are our revenues. We got a little in not property tax itself, but some other supplemental taxes that go along with it for $129,000. We've spent 1.7, and our net at that point was 1.3. And these were all reports run on the 7th of June. In the sales tax, you can see the to deposit total that we've received. We've spent very little, and our net is nice and healthy there. This is just another way of looking at it. And here are our expenditures over 25,000. And let me see if I can shrink this a little so you can see both the vendor and the expenditures. There we go. Okay. So it's our usuals, kind of our have-tos of keeping the library going. It's PG&E. We've had some book purchases. We've got another quarterly payment for Khalifa, which is our internet. And then down here, some more book purchases, and then $81,000 in architecture expenditures, and these were costs incurred by submitting plans and having them reviewed by the county permitting office, I believe. So even though nothing is happening at the specific branches, because I think this was Guerneville and one of the northern branches, stuff is still happening behind the scenes.
Can I go
Joe,
back?
Yep,
this is Andy. Could you go back to the PG&E line, please?
yep,
Yeah.
yep. It has gone up.
Yeah, I had the same question. Is that more than 1 month?
It might be, because I'm looking at the gap here. So this might have captured some of those expenditures, and then the remainder would have been paid here, but I'd have to check to make sure.
That would be good. I mean, that's inexplicable with the buildings closed, that it would be that high.
Agreed. Agreed. Were there any more questions on this page?
So you don't have any information you can share with us about that, is that right, Jody?
Not right off the top of my head. They do send bills to us that are broken down by branch. So I will be able to get it to you, and that way we can see if something is either going on with one specific branch or if it's just more than one payment made at one time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then we had some bathroom remodeling occurring at one of the branches. This is the North Bay Plumbing invoice here. We had some attorneys payments, and then another payment toward our mobile library.
Question, Jody, this is Barbara. Could you give us a bit of a rundown on the attorney fee, if that was cumulative for many months or? You know?
I believe it was for more than 1 month, yes. But again, that's something I can check and
Yeah, I'd like some more detail about that, please. It's almost $50,000.
Agreed.
okay. And then my staff has been monitoring the expenditures for purchases made to keep our libraries, our employees, and the community safe. You can see that it started out relatively modest in March. In April, we spent $18,000 on these items. In May, we spent $28,000. And then just starting out in June, we've already got almost $7,000 for a total expenditure to COVID-related items of $53,000.
Jody, this is Barbara. I had a few questions. Some of these things are really large one-time expenses. The reason it shot up in April, because $14,000 were for powered doors, safety, no touch. Was that, how many branches were outfitted with power doors at that time? Do you know?
Which month are you looking in?
I'm at April. The reason it went up so much is, you know, that one great big huge expense.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about powered doors at all of the branches. You'll see an expenditure here for pull plates. That's a non-powered way of allowing people to open the door without having to touch the handle. I don't know which branch this happened at.
Well, the reason I'm curious is because if they all got outfitted for $14,000, that's one thing. But if we're going to be facing $14,000 for every one, I mean, it's just a significant number. We should know how many doors that covered.
Okay.
And then on down there on that same page, the accumulator condensing units and the upgrade filters. I mean, those again are big one-time expenses, one would think, per branch, but we don't know how many branches that covered. And also, when you let us know that, if you could let us know what the expected benefit of those filters, how much safer does that make things and stuff. I just like some detail about that, because it's important, obviously, that all of our branches are safe. Just wondering about how much has been done, what's been done in each branch. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that is the end of the report. I'm happy to take any other questions that there might be.
Well, thank you, Jody. That was a nice, thorough report.
You are welcome.
There's a lot of the things like the sliding doors and so forth that I wasn't thinking about as COVID expenses, but I see they're necessary. I mean, I was just thinking hand sanitizers and gloves, and while we need a lot of them, I wouldn't think they were that expensive, but.
No, and there's no shortage on the gloves either, but they tend to be one-time use.
Yeah.
Is the problem.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, this is Barbara. Can I ask one more quick question
Sure.
about the COVID expenses? Are all the branches now stocked with the sanitizer and everything? Or is that just for those 5 that are open? And I'm also wondering about anticipated costs for plexiglass and other kind of expenses we may be looking at.
Yeah, we have been getting quotes on those, and currently every branch is stocked with a cart that is directly inside the entrance, and that has masks, gloves, spray down disinfectant, as well as wipes.
So all branches besides the ones that are open, everybody's ready to go with that
Yes,
level line.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
sure,
And then the plexiglass you're getting quotes on?
we are.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the budget for fiscal year 2020. So that starts on page 13.
Anne, did you want to preface any of this?
Sure. So what we've put together is a line item budget following the recommendations of the commission to realize a 5% reduction in property tax and a 22% reduction in sales tax. That's still a somewhat fluid situation, as everyone knows. So what we have is, I think, a very conservative approach to our budget, realizing that it may be a little better than projections or it may be worse. But we want to go into this with as much flexibility as possible in order to keep our mission to the community as robust as possible, and to keep our staff as cared for as possible. So as we go through this, you'll see one of the things that we're going to be recommending is that we not move into layoffs at this time. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is our staffing model is kind of what would be called in the business world a just-in-time versus a just-in-case. So under normal circumstances, if everything's going well and everyone reports to work, then we're in great shape. If we have absences, then we depend on our extra help to help fill those absences and keep our services going. If we are eliminating or severely cutting back on the use of extra help in the coming year, then it is important that we maintain all of our regular staff so that we can keep the services whole to the public. And it may be necessary to temporarily reduce hours. That's another thing that we will be recommending. But this is based on not only the fiscal information that we have, but also the information that we've gotten from our door counters. So we've been able to look at that and see when are the times that we could cut back and have the least impact on our communities. So Jody will go through that in a lot of detail, and we will welcome your questions.
Okay. So our objective here today is to review scenarios for line item budgets and possibly approve some rolling over, not surplus, but unspent revenue into services and supplies, to make a decision about fund balance areas to strengthen, and to recommend that the commission, it forgot to insert a phrase here. It's to recommend that the financial committee recommend to the commission to approve the line item budget as presented, or some other version that you would prefer. So just to give a little history, as you all know, the Library Commission approved this budget framework on June 2nd with a total of $29,555,000. So what that did, when we went to start talking about the budget earlier in this year, we wanted to go down to our actuals. And because we had surplus approved in this current year's budget, we were already looking at a cut of about 3 million just to get down to our actuals. Andy, did you have your hand up?
I'm just going to listen, Jody. I
Okay.
know I'm leaning on my hand. Sorry, I'll take
Okay,
it.
that's all right. So our actuals for our property tax this year, 20,765,000 and 12,600 for our sales tax. Then we got the pandemic. So when we look at what needed to be cut, which was 5% from property tax and 22% from sales tax, and you can see these totals. This is property tax here, and the amounts of the cuts to the various areas within the budget. And then down here to sales tax with a larger cut, you can see what the total cut is to our budget heading into 2021. The management agreed to a 65-35 split when making these cuts. In other words, the larger amount would go to salaries and benefits, and the smaller amount would go and impact services and supplies. All right, so these are the library management team's priorities for this upcoming year. To retain as much staff as possible, to keep services to the community as whole as possible, to continue with the Roseland branch renovations in preparation for it opening, and to hire additional Roseland positions prior to opening.
How many people would that be, or full-time equivalents for Roseland?
We have, and I'm not sure of the numbers, we have some that are working at the smaller temporary branch right now. We would be hiring a branch manager, and then I don't believe it's a full-time, but a part-time library specialist for Roseland.
Right. So
those would be, yeah, the two positions that we would not freeze for the upcoming year.
right. It's a 1.5 additional positions, 1.5 FTE.
Okay. So this is what our budget looks like between all of our divisions. And then the sections of the budget. So these large areas here are our personnel costs. Before we made the cuts to all of the areas within the budget across the whole organization, in other words, salaries and benefits, along with services and supplies, this was before the cut, the amount of our budget that was taken up by personnel was 72%. With the cuts applied, we're looking at 68% in our personnel costs. We've increased 5% in our services and supplies.
So Jody, here I have a question.
Okay.
On the first graph, I couldn't get the math to work for me. Are you just, I want to be sure I understand what you're trying to represent here. Are you saying that if we had kept salaries and benefits for the coming year at the same level that they had been budgeted for the current year, that they would represent 72% of the reduced budget amount?
Yes.
Because so here's my question. It looked to me as though salaries and benefits, I'm looking on page 16 of the presentation. Salaries and benefits for the fiscal year 19/20 budget were $22,582,984.
Yes.
Okay, and the total budget amount, and here I'm looking at slide 15, that was approved by the commission for the budget framework was $29,555,471. Is that what you have also? John, I'm getting it from page 15 in the deck.
So what?
Right. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at that total figure at the bottom, not the reduced salary and benefits, but just the total budget amount.
Yes.
So when I divide 22,582,000 by that, I come up with 76%. That if we had kept personnel the same and not made any reductions, but had reduced the total budget to 29,555,000, then salaries and benefits would have represented 76% of our total budget.
Okay. All right. So is anyone curious as to what other libraries staff their employees?
Well, I'm very curious, but I would really, and I thought it was great that you provided that, but I really felt like we were missing some information there, because you've got that chart that shows everything from 30% up to 74%.
Yes.
With no, it's like, how does Napa manage to run with only 30% of their budget allocated to personnel? Do they spend a lot on services? Do they have such an efficient team that they can get by with half the number of people? Or do they have whole other expense categories that we don't have that just make it more expensive to operate the library as a whole?
This is Barbara. Don't you think it has a lot to do with just the structure? I mean, which of these libraries is actually comparable to ours? I mean, the buildings are owned by the cities, and, I mean, there's a lot of differences in the way libraries are set up. So I'm in terms of the equivalency of these percentages, for one thing, I'm not sure what we're trying to get at. And then secondly, I don't think that these are all by any means comparable library situations to ours.
I was given this list and told these were comparable. So maybe we have a different idea of what's comparable. But I was given Oakland, for example, and San Mateo as well, were given to me as comparatives for our library.
Well, I think a lot more detail is involved in this. I mean, a comparable library would be a library that it's run by a JPA that has, cities providing the buildings and stuff. These are county libraries and city libraries, and I don't know. But to the bigger point is, what is it that we're trying to get at here? What's our
what I was trying to get at in the presentation was that my belief was that we should apply the cuts to salaries and benefits as well as services and supplies, and that looking at how other agencies staff their libraries, what percentage of their budget it is, just gives us a look at where we fall. We're not way up at the top, we're not way at the bottom, we're kind of in the middle.
Well,
This is Tom Hauser. May I break in just for a second? I thought the commission already made that decision at its last meeting on the beginning of June.
Tom, they did. They said that we would apply cuts between all aspects of the budget. I just wanted to show some comparables because sometimes I get asked that. And I guess I'm trying to find a balance between providing not enough information and too much information.
Okay, well, my thought is that right now this is too much. If you're looking, the commission made a decision, and this is, I think Barbara has a good point that San Francisco Library, I don't know how much they have to pay for maintaining their buildings and if that's in their budget or not, or how it works and all that kind of stuff. So their comparable is a hard thing to work out. Anyway, that's just my thought. Thank you.
No, I appreciate the feedback. My thought process when I was developing the presentation was that someone was going to ask. And I wanted to have that information available, even though it wasn't immensely detailed per branch or per organization.
Okay,
So
I pulled up the budget proposal from a year ago, and this is the April document on page 39. It shows salary and benefits is at 64% in that budget. So that's certainly a comparison. So we're going from 64 to 67. My problem with looking at other libraries is I have no idea what their building expenses are. You know, are they leasing? Are they paying back construction bonds? It's really hard to compare budgets between libraries. So.
Agree with that, but I think it also would be helpful if we had some of that information. And obviously we don't, but we're past that. The commission, I agree with everything that's been said. The commission approved the framework. So
Right.
this would be something that would be useful for us to look at next year. But at this point, I think we're past this decision.
Agree.
Okay.
And just one thing, Randall, with regard to the 2019/2020 budget, salary and benefits represent 62% of that. Small difference, but so we're going from 62% in the current year budget to 68% in the approved framework, although it changes because of additional funds that Jody pulls in later on. We'll talk about it when we get there.
Okay. So what you'll see in what I have recommended for the line item budgets is first to point out, as Ann touched on, that the budget reductions needed, which will be continually monitored going forward, will mean reduced hours for our patrons. And then that our cost saving measures in salaries and benefits, while saving regular employees, would freeze all or part of extra help. You'll notice that in some slides, I'm referring to the extra help action as releasing them. And I don't know that that's necessarily required rather than freezing them for a year. But that's a later discussion. Again, we're looking at once the branches are fully open, there would be one day where the evening hours might be reduced, but would remain 6-day service with Central being open on Sundays. And then I also wanted to point out that the line item budgets I'm presented include recommended changes that I've made to cover some holes in our services and supplies. So rather than show them to you twice, before and after the change, I'm showing them in advance of the changes that we'll make. So it's my recommendation that we roll over some of our unspent surplus into services and supplies. I think it will be primarily in property tax. That's our holes. And I think we will have that in property tax once the appropriate amount is transferred into sales tax, which we've not done for the past 2 months, specifically in payroll. Currently, we have about 3.4 million in unspent revenues between our two funds, meaning property tax and sales tax. I am guessing if our spending continues at a rate that it has been, 1.7 million will be what's left in unspent revenues. We are recommending freezing some or all of extra help employees, implementing a 1-year hiring freeze, including the vacant positions that are frozen, with the exception of the 2 Roseland positions. And also, if a position that is currently occupied now becomes vacant, we may need to replace that person and not freeze the vacant position. And then we're going to be talking about fund balance and where we would like to put some of that is not currently assigned. And then recommend to the commission that this line item budget as presented be approved.
Is it time for questions
Sure.
on that page? So the last time the library went through, you know, it's a major difficulties, and they closed on Mondays, and this was old commission days, and they closed on Mondays, and then I believe terminated all the extra help. And I believe that would create huge problems. I think the thinking at the time was people would go from branch to branch and fill in, and that wasn't a practical way to approach things. So I do have to express my concerns at this point about freezing the extra help, but I'm still really unclear about where we're going, the schedule to reopen, how many hours we're talking about, what days we're talking about, and all that stuff. And I'm assuming that we're all going to get a presentation on that, I guess, at our maybe next commission meeting. But I would just put a flag about my uncomfortableness if we're going to expect to be somewhat back to normal with somewhat back to normal hours, except one less evening. I don't see that freezing extra help is going to let us, cover the personnel needs. So I'm just concerned about that because we've seen this before. But again, I just feel like we need a whole lot more information about how this is sketching out in the plans, about what the schedules are like, and what days and all that kind of stuff. So is the expectation that we will hear more about that at the June meeting?
Yes.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Here are your line item budgets by division. The first up is executive. What I will point out here is that all of the rents that get paid are kept in this budget. I have done a bit of this kind of cleanup in several of the other divisions. This saves on a lot of confusion in coding where the rent should be charged. If it's only in one place, it can only be coded to that one area. Memberships and certifications are things like our Chamber of Commerce membership, our ALA membership. I hope I'm getting that correct. And then the others are just incidental costs that total 1.6 million between property and sales tax. This first column is property, the second is sales tax. Are there any questions?
I think that would be helpful if you labeled those property and sales
I believe they
tax.
are on the next ones. I just
Okay.
realized that those were missing. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome.
And Jody, just a quick question about the rents. I think I asked this at the last meeting. Were you able to check the lease and see when our rent's going up on the headquarters building?
I'm not, I'm so sorry. I don't remember that I was checking on when it was going up.
Well, it's
But
just,
the term of the contract, and we have 4 more years.
yeah, 4 more years, but I think there's built-in escalator cost, increase in the cost. And I don't know how much it is and when it hits, like whether it's July 1 of every year. Anyway, if you could just let us know at some point, I appreciate it.
Okay, this is the recommended Public Services Division line item budget. Here you will see the private car expense. What that is the mileage that our employees are reimbursed for. And then some office supplies. The big change to this budget is that it's a lot smaller because this year, for example, and in previous years, various rents, maintenance, janitorial, landscaping, and security costs were all included in their budget, but those contracts are actually managed by facilities. So we're moving all of those into facilities so they can be managed from one place. Okay, this is our collections budget. And you can see in books and media, I wanted to point out that if we don't, if we're not able to roll over unspent revenues at the end of this fiscal year, this number will be 0. The cuts that we made previous to starting out with the pandemic cuts hit primarily in services and supplies. And so we're seeing that now when we look at our have-tos, and I think one of our have-tos is books and other information for our patrons. So this was a big reason for my recommendation in using unspent revenues. Okay, and here is the facilities budget. I can make this larger if you like.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here you can see that the janitorial services, our maintenance and improvements on our buildings, landscaping, parks and grounds, security, and janitorial services are all here. The safety supplies and equipment also would get a boost from rolling over unspent revenue, because we're anticipating that the ongoing costs of PPEs and other expenses related to COVID-19 are going to continue at a pace for a while.
Jody, this is Barbara. I have some questions about this page.
Sure.
Under janitorial, for example, property tax would be $175,000, the sales tax $218,000. I'm just questioning that with maybe my Measure Y overhead, oversight hat on, why the large more than half of the cost of janitorial is put over in the sales tax column, and the same thing for security services. My understanding was we should use the sales tax proportionately. Like if we're open more, the Measure Y is paying for more hours, and so the proportion more hours would apply to things like this. I think that it doesn't look right to me, or safety supplies and equipment also, why that would all be coming out of Measure Y funds.
I can try to play with these and switch them around, certainly.
Well, we just have to pay attention to Measure Y and what it can be spent for.
Understood.
And, it's not ours to use, as we want to, but,
As it's dictated.
paid for it. And anyway, there's just something wrong with the way these are allocated.
Okay.
I believe the Measure Y committee would appropriately ask that question.
This is Tom Hauser. I don't think we've ever had really the janitorial supplies on the same page where we had the property tax and the sales tax. They were always on separate pages. And so for me, at least, there was a disconnect, and I never could see that what's sales tax and what's property tax. And I don't doubt this is correct. And actually, I like being able to see it this way because I think it gives me a better feel for what we're doing on each of these areas. So
Thomas, Andy,
I appreciate this.
yeah, I had the same disconnect when we used to get it on different pages. Jody, I've got one real nitpicky question comment here, so please forgive.
Okay.
But it's in the janitorial services. We have 175,000 in property, 218,000 in sales tax. That doesn't have.
It does not. Guilty as charged. I missed that one. Thank you.
No, I know, but because I don't want it to be nitpicky, here's my question. Was this done on Excel so we have confidence in all the other calculations, or?
It was.
Okay. Thank you.
So this is Barbara. I like the way this looks. That's not what I'm questioning.
I know what you're questioning.
Okay, but I'm not
I do.
feeling the other commissioners understand what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying, Barbara. I don't have any information to evaluate it.
Okay.
That is, we do have a Measure Y committee, which is supposed to be reviewing our expenses and assuring that they are appropriate, don't we?
Yeah, we do. But that's what I'm saying. We need to make sure we're doing it right before when it goes to them. You know, they're a oversight kind of a advisory committee. We're the ones that need to make sure that we know we're comfortable with these numbers before they go there. But the Measure Y funds have to do with obviously with the sales tax measure and the expansion of services. And I don't believe that these are proportionate to that. So that's why I'm just requesting that Jody look at those a little more. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have our information technology. This budget is tight. Vicki very generously made a lot of cuts to this before we got to having to cut more, and just keeping our infrastructure as far as IT goes running takes some money. Not the least of which are the expenditures for paying the monthly rates on our hotspots. For example, if we have 200 hotspots, that costs us $93,500 a year to keep them operating so that people can use them. So there's lots of things like that in this particular budget.
Jody, I had a question. What is that large 51401 rents and lease equipment, $808,000 for sales tax? What is that?
Well, it's not just one item. It's things like our copier leases. It's leasing the big scanner copier that we have for our graphics department. It's the copiers at all the branches. And I know there's things in there that are not copiers, so that's not the expense of the copiers separated out. But it's everything that would be too expensive to buy that we lease in technology equipment.
Well, again, I thought it was one big thing. It's a very large number to all be charged off to the sales tax. And I just would, that needs some analysis.
I will definitely look at that. And the other thing want you to keep in mind is that I was following pretty closely to this year's budget that Ken worked on. So if he had a large number in there, I felt that was okay. But we can certainly reevaluate that as we go.
Okay, yeah, I think it's important to know what's in that. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. And then budget and finance, our additional request was to ask for an online purchase order and purchasing system. Currently, we are still writing our purchase orders by hand and tracking them that way, which makes things fall through the cracks, and we don't want that. So that was our request for this year. These county charges here are for our use of the enterprise financial system that belongs to the county that we use. And then here are human resources. We do not have this many employees in human resources, in case some of you saw that large number. This is the division where our retirement benefit payments are kept.
So that's, the OPEB payments are in there. So what you're saying?
No, our retiree benefits, so their health benefits, their vision benefits that get paid throughout the year are in here.
That's OPEB though. That's
It is not
retiree.
OPEB. What OPEB is a fund that invests the payments that we make to it. It's a trust account, and it pays down our future liability so that when we get to the future, we're not running out of money for our retirees. Does that make sense?
Well, I know there's pay as you go, and then there's the big chunks that we make, and I consider them all OPEB because there are other personnel, other retired employee benefits. I thought it was all in the same category called OPEB, and I know that there's pay as you go that we get, that we're paying each year. So anyway, terminology. So I'll go with what you are, how you're phrasing it.
Okay. So originally, our training budget was divided among all of the divisions to manage on their own. The budget was $140,000. We've eliminated that. So no division has training money in it, although employees are welcome to use their staff development funds for that purpose. They still have those. And we retained 40,000 of that for training that our department would conduct that's either mandated by law, is safety related, or remedial. All right, this is our fund development. This is a new division this year. It's a division of one, and she's got a little to work with. Not a lot, but the only thing coming out of sales tax for this is her salary.
So is that just one, that's just one person?
Correct.
There's no part-timers or anything in there?
No.
So that's salary and benefit at 175,000?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
That's including all the benefit.
Yeah, I know. Benefits about, what do we use, 40% as the benefit number?
We're closer to 47 now.
47%.
Yes. Okay, and marketing. This is our other new division this year. And forgive me, I forgot to mention public services is one division now. This year and prior to this year, they were two separate divisions, but we're combining them into one. So marketing takes our existing graphics department and combines it with our marketing manager. And they have room for advertising, which is, I count it as a publication. It's not really a legal notice, but this is the chart of accounts that we use because they are dictated by the county who owns the software. What was another big purchase in here? Their office supplies and their printing and binding supplies. They will get these supplies for the whole department, including our paper. So that's why those are a little larger. Okay, so this is the recommended total budget, which you can see is outside of the framework that was originally approved by the commission by 1.7 million, bringing the property tax up to 21 million for a total budget of 31.3 million. Sales tax remains the same. Any questions on this part?
Well, yeah, I have a question, and maybe it's the same question that Barbara was asking before, Jody, but
Okay.
it sounded like the $1.7 million that we're going to roll over from this year to next year is available because we received sales tax payments that we were not expecting. Is that correct?
That is part of it. However, the other part is that every quarter, the CFO transfers expenditures into the Measure Y or the sales tax fund. Basically what you have is, although there are positions that are paid for or categorized as being either in sales tax or in property tax, they're all paid out of property tax. And then the money is transferred in on a percentage basis quarterly. I've not been doing that because I was afraid we would run out. So now I will be able to transfer those 2 quarters of expenditures into Measure Y, and that will give us more property tax unspent revenue.
Okay, so I mean, my question is, I think just along the same lines as Barbara, is this kosher what we're doing? Are we
It is.
doing that, you know, and as long as we are, that's fine.
So yes.
So I'm going to make a comment here. I appreciate you going through the line item as you did, and I appreciate this summary. What this did not enable me to do was to identify what percentage of this new $31 million budget was going to be going to salary and benefits, what percentage to services and supplies, and what percentage to capital, because that was something that was available to us in the framework, but has since changed. So I ended up having to put all these numbers from all these pages into my own Excel to figure that out.
Okay.
But I think it's important, if I might have a moment, to share this with the committee, because this is what represents the change between this budget and the framework that was approved by the commission. Would it be okay if I share a document with everybody for a moment?
Absolutely.
Okay, I realize this is going to be probably pretty small and hard to see, but can you? How is it?
I can see it.
Is
Yeah.
it okay?
Yeah.
So what I did was I went by division, and I looked at the amount for salary and benefits from property tax, sales tax total, the amount for services and supplies by property tax, sales tax total, and the amount for capital. And then I was able to add them up to say, okay, what is the total salary and benefits relative to this new budget? And the new budget figure over here is, the 31,338,000. So with this budget that Jody has just laid out, total salary and benefits, 20,302,000. This represents an increase from the approved framework. The approved framework was 20,106,000. So this was increased by 196,000, not a large amount, but still an increase. Salary and benefits in this newly proposed budget represent 64.78%. So still higher than the 62% in the current year budget, but not as high as we had anticipated from the framework. In terms of services and supplies, the total in the new budget is 9,835,000. In the approved framework, it was 8 million. So there's been an increase here of 1,746,000 and change. The percentage here, 31.39% of the budget. In the approved framework, it was 27.37%. In the current year budget, it was 29%. And then in terms of capital, total capital, 1.2 million. The approved framework was 1.36. So there's a reduction of 160,000. Capital expenses represent a little less than 4%. In the approved framework, it was 4.6%. In the current year budget, it was 8.8. So this is what the impact of the changes are. I wanted everybody to be able to see it because that's what essentially we're being asked to approve, right?
What happened with the capital? What was the?
Well, you can see that there's two allocations, one for facilities and one for IT, for a total of 1.2 million. In the approved framework, it was 1.36.
Yeah, we don't know what that minus 160 is though, do we?
It was a cut in capital to give more money to services and supplies.
Okay, I'll stop sharing here. Thank you.
Andy,
Yeah.
could you email that to Jane and Jane send it out to the rest of the committee members?
I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
You bet. I can send it to everybody directly, Randall, without violating the Brown Act. If it's
That's
just
correct.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm doing that. It's you, Barbara,
Tom,
and Deborah.
Deborah.
Yeah. And I will send to Jane as well.
So a quick question. So
I'll look
we're
for it.
now at a $31 million budget. We're back to a $31 million budget for this year. And now I can't find, what is our budget for the year we're just ending? It's not much different than that, is it?
36 million because
It
remember
was
it
36 million this year.
Oh, and that was the 3 million carryover?
That was the 3 million in surplus that was approved in the budget at the beginning of the year.
So a roughly $33 million budget, and now we're talking about a $31 million budget. So it's not disaster. I wanted to, well, never mind. I just want to point that out. It's pretty close to our current budget.
well, it's 86% of the current budget. I mean, it's a significant cut, but it's not a, could be worse.
Right. What percent did you
This
get?
is Tom Hauser. We still haven't touched any of our other than the unspent capital expenditures, we haven't touched any of our reserves that we have there. So future years, we also have the potential for spreading some of this out
Right,
and there. So I just want to keep that in mind.
right. In fact, we're building our reserves.
So yes, and these are some of the slides that are coming up.
Yeah.
So the solutions that the library is proposing is to roll over this 1.782,554 of unspent revenue into the 2021 budget to primarily fund services and supplies. And this will help with the reductions that we had to make in our services and supplies budget, which totaled 1.3.
Jody, where does the 1.3 number come from? What does it represent?
The total of the cuts that needed to be made based on the 35% of the 5% property tax cut and 35% of the 22% sales tax cut.
And Jody, this is Barbara, the collections budget I know is of great concern too. I just got off a meeting with the Friends of the Library. So what kind of, since we're rolling this unspent money over, what kind of cut to the actual collections budget is it?
If this version of the budget is approved, I believe they will be getting $2.7 million. I believe their funding for this year was 3.4.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. And I think this was also captured on a previous slide. So this is the cuts to services that add up to that 1.3, Andy, the 363,000 in property tax and the 970,000 in sales.
This is Deborah. At some point, it would be nice to have a comparison with last year's numbers and this year's numbers.
Yes.
We don't necessarily need it for the commission meeting, but it makes people, it gives people a ballpark to kind of see where the changes are and when to panic and when not to panic.
Yes, agreed.
Oh, okay. Down at the bottom of this page, you can see the cuts that we had to make just at the end of this fiscal year to get us to actuals.
Mm-hmm.
Then from the actuals, starting out in 2021, this is the cut that we had to make because of COVID. So the total amount we've decreased from the prior year, if we approved just that framework of 29.5, would be a loss of 6.8 million. Okay. Okay, so I believe we were on solutions, and this talked about where that money would go. And this figure here is going to be different than on the collections page. It's however much money we have left, I want to give as much as possible to collections. And then of course, these amounts would be less if we end up with less unspent revenue this fiscal year.
Jody, a question on that. the 94,000 for monthly IT, is that still using that number that we were told, I think last time, like $38 or $39 a month?
Correct.
What we're paying for that? And I don't know, that didn't seem to be 200. It didn't seem to be the calculation, but I didn't actually do it. I'm just going to throw in, it's kind of I don't know, it's slightly off the topic, but the hotspots, I would like to just suggest that we put on an agenda sometime talking about the use of these hotspots, and with the inequity problem that we see in all the schools and everything, we might not reserve some of these hotspots for students, and rather than all people using to watch movies on Oopla and stuff. I just like to bring that up as a possible policy discussion in the future. Thank you.
Well, what I would like to change on the hotspots is I would like to restrict them to people that have the, whatever the food stamp card is now called.
CalFresh. It's called CalFresh.
Yes.
Yeah. CBE, something like that.
I'm right here.
So I think that, if we want to help people that need them, we should restrict them to people that are getting the food stamp program, CalFresh. That's my opinion.
Well, I think it's a policy discussion, and we could break the numbers down into different categories or something, but I agree. I think we need to talk about it.
And we can certainly have those conversations. I would just like to point out the 200 hotspots mentioned in this presentation are 200 new hotspots that Vicki Turbovich was able to get for us for free. We got the units for free, or we will get them for free, and that 94,000 is to pay for the monthly service charge. So we will have ultimately 1,000 hotspots, and that will go a long way toward helping with the digital divide and the people who need those services.
I think that's great, and I'm appreciate Vicki's efforts in getting it up to 1,000. But again, there's no guarantee this helps the students with the digital divide or whatever. We don't really know what people are doing, and it's none of our business unless we put aside a certain amount into certain categories for certain programs, which would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the needed reductions in salaries and benefits. Between the two funds, we needed to cut 2.7 million.
Jody, can I stop you there? I'm sorry, I don't see that.
You don't see what?
No, I don't, because
I'm asking, what don't you see?
well, the 1920 budget number for salary and benefits was 22,582,000. And the framework, that was approved had a salaries and benefits of 20,106,000. So that's a difference of 2.48. It's not that number.
That is correct, because some of the cost saving measures that we're recommending would then not come out of the budget, if that makes sense. And here's where the total is, if that's what you were not seeing, the 674,000 and the 1.8.
Well, that also doesn't add up to 2.7.
Okay. If we deployed these two cost-saving measures, if we froze the vacant positions with the two exceptions that were gone over before,
Right.
And if we not released but froze some or all of extra help, this amount here would be the total amount for freezing all of extra help. If we froze half, for example, then this amount would be half, which is around 344. This would leave 590,000 to cover all regular staff so that they could be retained. Any other reductions would be subject to negotiations with the union. And if only half of the extra help were released, 935,000 would be the amount of reductions needed to retain all of staff. So the cost would go up if we kept half of our extra help staff working. Again, as we went over earlier, that even retaining all of our regular staff may mean reductions in hours at the library branches. Extra help employees represent more than 30,000 hours of work every year. And I also wanted to point out that most vacant and frozen positions are in public services. All right, let's talk about our fund balance. The library's most recent fund balance policy was approved on July 9th of 2018. And it says in essence that the library shall maintain a minimum of 15% of the library's budgeted expenditures annually with the goal of having 20%. Currently, we are at 15. Here is what is in our current fund balance. I've shown you this before. We have our capital projects, our restricted funds, which are also divided by branch and program. We have our stabilization fund. We have our OPEB money, petty cash, and then reserve is what I'm calling it's money that has not been assigned, but is in our fund balance, along with this amount, which is also unassigned.
So Jody, quick question. That in the previous slide, the 15% that we're supposed to set aside, is that what's being labeled here as the stabilization fund?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Jody, so the reserve, what you've got labeled reserve, is that what one might call unassigned fund balance?
That's exactly what it would be called.
Okay.
So why is that then separated? Why do we have one line for reserve and another line for unallocated?
Because this was new. This was already in the fund balance. This was a surprise to me when I was running the reports. So we had more money in there than I thought we did.
But essentially, they're the same category.
They are exactly the same, and the upcoming slides are going to discuss that.
Okay, thank you.
Terms our fund balance policy uses is non-spendable fund balance, restricted, and then there are brief definitions of what each of these are. So we use non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. What I have access to label our fund balance in our system is restricted, assigned, and unassigned. So this is how our fund balance breaks into the EFS system, so that when I run the report, I know what's in each of these categories. These are assigned, this is restricted, and then these two pots of money are unassigned. And our policy says that any assigned fund balance, expenditure of any of that would need approval from the commission to spend.
Jody, quick question. I printed some of this out to look at because I can't follow it all online like that. But my page doesn't look like your page. Of course, the page is not numbered, but it's labeled the same as this, how our fund breaks into EFS, and it just has the total of 22 million on here. It doesn't have that extra line unallocated 1.7. Did you change the slide? Or something?
Not once it was posted. So I'm not sure why yours looks different. And the unassigned is 1.5, not 1.7.
Did I say 1.7? I didn't mean
Uh-huh.
to. I can
Yeah.
see it on your slide, but it's not on this one that I printed out right before the meeting. But
I'm looking at the PDF, Barbara. Page 41 looks just like the slide that Jody's showing, and it does have the
okay.
unallocated line also. Maybe it was just a printing glitch.
Well, I don't think so, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But so we're talking about unassigned. So again, calling the line reserve is confusing because reserves are really the stabilization fund. That's really our reserves.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's
She's saying the stabilization fund is the stabilization fund.
right, but that is what we call our reserves that we need for emergencies. And then when she's calling reserve as that's really unassigned. But I don't know. I think there's still a problem with the terminology here.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So you would prefer that what is here noted as reserve was simply called unassigned.
It is, because it's unassigned, and then the unallocated is just
It's also-
something, but it's also unassigned, and those are
Right, which is why I made this chart. So
Yeah.
that we could align ourselves with the terms that we actually have available to us in the system. So the total between the two pots of unassigned money is 5.4 million. So we currently have 5.4 million in unassigned funds. What I would recommend is that you add 1.6 million of that to the stabilization fund, which will bring us to 20%. And then I would also suggest that out of that unassigned portion, 1.5 go to future OPEB payments. That would essentially give us 2 more years.
so we have caught up with the $3 million deposit, and
Yes.
that's just 750,000 per year out of the operating expenses, which is the other part of our policy, and that would take us through 2 more years. And I agree with both those. That's a good idea. Thank you.
So then you still have some unassigned remaining. So you can leave it unassigned. You can decide where you think it would be best applied, whether it's more to the stabilization fund or what, or you could use some of the unassigned fund balance to cover the remaining amount needed to retain all of the regular staff. So it would be $590,000 of it if all extra help staff were frozen or not used for this year, or $935,000 if only half of the extra help were frozen and not used.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding this. You're saying that we would, if half, or to pay for all the extra help staff would cost 590,000, but to pay for half of the extra help staff would be 935,000?
Actually, no. If we wanted to retain all our regular staff, because we identified the cost savings of the extra help staff at 689,000 for the year. So if we were to retain all our staff, if all the extra help staff were released, I see where your question is. I do. So if we froze all of the extra help, it would take this amount of money to retain all the staff. If only part of the extra help were frozen, it would take more, money to retain all of our regular staff and then half of our extra help. Does that make sense?
No, I'm sorry. That does not make sense to me.
Okay.
Because we're not talking about the full-time, the permanent staff is not part of this picture. This is just the discussion about extra help staff, right?
No. No. I said on a prior slide that we would still need some kind of way to pay for $590,000 to keep all of our staff. If we cannot keep all of our staff, that would mean all of the extra help would have to be released, because we have to get rid of the extra help folks in order to start layoffs, if that were what we arrived at with the union or from direction from the commission. Now, if only half extra help were frozen, meaning that we used extra help, it's going to take that much more money because we're retaining more employees.
I wouldn't call this slide other possible uses. I would, because you've got some recommendations in here. Is that not true?
It is if the commission's priorities are the same as ours. So, you know, for our management team, it was important that we retain all the staff. That might not be the same view of the commission or the finance committee here today. So these are recommendations, but I'm not making the assumption that you have to do it. There are other options we could go.
So could you roll back for a second to the recommended total budget on page 33?
Okay.
It sounds like this budget is including some cuts to staff. Could you outline, please, what cuts to staff are assumed in this recommended total budget?
In this recommended total budget, there are no cuts to staff. The staffing cuts that were made, we are trying to present cost-saving measures that will allow us to retain all of the staff without letting anyone else go. So who would be let go in this would be our extra help employees if we froze them, and that's a cost of approximately $689,000 a year. And then freezing the vacant positions and having a hiring freeze, I believe that total was 1.4 million.
So with this, let me see if I can play this back.
Okay.
This $31 million budget assumes that there will be no extra help used during the year. And it also assumes that, with two exceptions, vacant positions will not be filled during the year. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So if we, what is the library's recommended priority? If there were some additional money available, is the library saying that you would like the ability to fill vacant positions? Or are you saying you would like the ability to retain some of the extra help?
Well, I think if our management team had it any way they wanted, they would do neither of those things. They really feel, especially in public services, that it's so important to retain as much staff as possible. However,
Well, but I'm sorry, but we're assuming that we're retaining staff, right? This
it's right.
based on the assumption that we're retaining all current staff except extra help.
Yes. However, this budget does not take into account rolling any unassigned money into salaries and benefits to retain staff. So we're still looking at a $560,000 shortfall.
That's right.
So boy, that is not clear. I'm sorry. So you're saying that this budget represents retaining all staff, but actually we're missing $500,000 that we need to do that.
Correct.
Yes.
Is that what you?
I don't get it.
What don't you get, Barbara?
Well, it doesn't spell it out. I mean, I was under the impression, like Andy, you look at this recommended total budget and it's no cuts, only, well, not only, but you know, extra help. And then I don't see where the 500 and some thousand shows on here.
It's there.
It shows on that slide that we were just on.
Right.
Well, I guess the bigger question for me, and I did send out the Excel to everybody so you have it, is with this additional revenue that you used to expand beyond the framework that the commission approved at the last commission meeting, that was $1.782 million.
Yes.
But only 196,000 went into salaries. You put 1.746 million into services and supplies.
Correct. So what I want to say about budgeting salaries and benefits is that it's not going to be a one-by-one budget. It's not going to be the exact amount of every position that we have and all of the benefits for it for a year. There has to be money in place that is in addition to the salaries and benefits that pay for things like buying people out of their accruals when they retire. And there isn't a way to gauge how many are going to retire at any given time. So you need to have a cushion. So adding money to that does not necessarily save employees. It's giving us the ability to pay out people's accruals when they retire. So that is in there as well.
And where is it on that page?
It's all in salaries and benefits. It's one big pot of money divided among the divisions.
So if we do see a certain amount of number of retirements, we are going to replace those people, right? You already.
Yes, that was our idea. We would be
Okay.
freezing the positions that are vacant now, but positions that happen through attrition would be able to be refilled.
I thought you said that. Thank you. Just confirming. So there's extra money in there for.
There is.
Okay.
But am I right in thinking that this is not a balanced budget?
Yes.
It is not a balanced budget unless we want to retain all the staff. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. If we want to retain all the staff, then no, this is not balanced. We would need more money, possibly from the fund to balance, or in concessions that are negotiated with the union.
So you are recommending that we use some of the reserves to
The unassigned fund balance.
that's it. Sorry, I'm not looking
No,
at that
that's all right.
slide. The unassigned fund balance to pay either $590,000 and change, or $935,000 to retain all of the staff and half of the extra help.
Correct.
Which gives us a very slim amount of money if something major happens, like a fire season.
Correct, which is why we'll be monitoring it very closely for the first couple of months to see what our revenue does. If something with our revenue changes dramatically, for example, we still haven't gotten our sales tax measures for April, May, and June that are still outstanding. If the revenue that we receive is all of a sudden a lot less than we'd anticipated or made cuts to, then yeah, we would have to come up with some other solutions.
Okay, but that's sort of the couple of recommendations from the staff on the table.
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Barbara, do you have a question?
I would just say, so going back to the page called unassigned fund balance under 5.4 and unassigned funds. This is my 2 cents. I agree with the stabilization fund, taking it to 20%.
Mm-hmm.
That's quote our reserves, our rainy day fund. Let's bring it up.
Okay.
We have to take care of OPEB. I agree that let's put aside 2 years there. That's out of the operating expense. So operating expenses are a little easier in the 2 years after that. I would say that the balance, to me, I would put in some sort of new special emergency contingency fund, because there's so many unknowns. We just don't know where this is going. When we came on the commission, and the new commission, and everything was in such desperate straits, and there was this fund balance policy, and we would try to follow this fund balance policy, and the numbers kind of never added up, and it was all very confusing and stuff. So we revised the fund balance policy, and I would say that we need to continue to look at that and categorize and make sure all of our funds are really clear what it is that we have and what it is that we're doing with it. So rather than having two clumps of money, one called unassigned fund balance and the other one was unallocated or whatever it is, I would say that we might want to think about revising our fund balance policy, look at the whole thing, and include a special category for emergencies, because we've just faced one after the next. So that's my feeling, and I believe Deborah was pointing out how kind of thin and small these balances are anyway. So
yeah,
that's my feeling. I agree with that, Barbara.
Okay.
And I guess I'm troubled by something, and I don't know if some of the other commissioners on the committee would like to comment on this, but when the commission approved the budget framework back on June 1st, I don't recall the commission approving the use of any fund balances to fill holes in the 2021 budget. I thought we were under the impression that we were creating a budget framework based on what we anticipated to be likely property tax and sales tax revenue. What I think I'm hearing is that you're actually asking us to approve the utilization of some of our unallocated funds to meet budgetary needs for the 2021 budget. And this is something that I do not think the commission approved the other night. Does anybody else?
I agree with you, Andy.
Yeah, they did not, Andy.
Well, this
agree.
is Deborah. However, I would also just point out that she found additional dollars. And so if part of this recommendation, I'm not sure that I would have said other possible uses, but if they found dollars that might allow us to do something that we would have wanted to do anyway, I think that that they are bringing a recommendation to us that does things with dollars that we were not aware of. So I think that they are not, they're not throwing our recommendations out. They're just supplementing them.
Well, no, I agree with that. And that's where I thought we were when we were looking at the recommended total budget on page 33. But now we're hearing that, in fact, well, no, there's a $500,000 hole in that budget, and they would like us to allocate money from the fund balance to fill that. That's a different, to my way of thinking, that's a very different story. I'm happy that we have additional funds coming in, but I feel like we're being asked to approve something that the commission didn't discuss.
Well, if there are additional dollars in the fund balance, though, that then could be used for something like this, then I think that was my understanding, but I could be completely wrong.
I don't think it's additional dollars to the fund balance. I think it's additional dollars in tax revenues.
Right. Yes. I agree with Andy, and especially since we have a commitment to look at this basically monthly, we're going to be continuing to look at the budget. I don't think that, at least it wouldn't be my recommendation that this commission or this committee recommend kind of backfilling this hole, because it wasn't what the commission agreed with. And I think what we're trying to get at is something that Jody takes to the county, right? And that where we're trying to go right now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have Jody take something to the county that's kind of significantly different than the framework that the commission agreed to at the commission meeting. That's just my feeling.
So the 1.7 million in unspent revenue is what I recommended rolling over in primarily services and supplies. So that is not fund balance. That's unspent money out of the revenue we have thus far received.
Right. Okay.
The 590 was a recommendation using the unassigned fund balance.
So let me go back to that question, Jody, because the question specifically that I'd like to dig into a little bit is because, again, let's agree that the $1.782 million that we weren't expecting, that it looks like we have, that's great. Now, nobody's unhappy about that. The question is about the allocation of it. Of that 1.78 million, little less than 200,000 is going to salary and benefits. The bulk of it, in fact, almost all of it, is going to services and supplies, because there's also a reduction in capital. The result of that is that services and supplies are going to represent 31% of the budget, compared to 29% of last year's budget and 27% of the framework that we approved at the commission meeting. So I guess the question is, if the library feels so strongly that it's important to cover staff expenses, why is all that money being allocated to services and supplies?
Those were the biggest holes in the budget. The cuts that we made to the budget before we even started talking about COVID-19, just to get down to our actuals, those cuts were all taken out of services and supplies. So we already had a cut there, and then the additional cut because of the pandemic really didn't fill in services and supplies very much.
I guess here's what I'm struggling with. I understood from an earlier slide and from some discussion that the staff was looking at reducing roughly proportionately. In other words, that was where that 65-35 split came from. The idea was that if salaries represent a certain percentage, then we would reduce those somewhat proportionately. What's happened, in fact, is that capital has been the biggest source of a reduction, right? We went from almost 9% of the budget last year to less than 4% in the budget you're presenting tonight.
Yes.
Salary and benefits increased a bit from 62 to 64, almost 65. But so did services and supplies.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure what the struggle is.
Well, it's just this is kind of new news that there's this big hole in the budget, and it's just surprising to me that there's a hole in the area of salaries and benefits when we've just put 1.74 million into services and supplies. You know, if salaries and benefits were such a priority for the library, it seems an odd way to represent it. That's all.
Okay. I swear I'm going to die trying to get you a presentation that you can get behind. I understand we're not there yet.
It's not a question of a presentation. It's understood. This is not. I think I'm struggling with the title on this slide. This is not other possible uses. This is the ask, right? The library is coming to the Finance Committee asking for us to allocate either 590,000 or 935,000 from the fund balance so that the library will be able to retain additional staff and pay extra help. Is that not the request?
Yes, so Deborah was correct, and this should be titled recommendations.
Well, can I ask a question in here, this Barbara? So it's hard for us to know whether we should, you know, act on the extra help being released or only half the extra help being released when we don't have any idea what the plan is. And it's so, you know, I just feel like it's almost, you know, flipping a coin or something. I don't feel like we have the information we need. I don't know how many people have been called back to work yet. I don't know how many months it's going to be, you know, until we open the doors. I don't know how many hours we're going to be open. I don't know how many, I read somewhere it was going to be one night. I don't know when that is or how that works or anything like that. So, you know, it's just, I think extra help staff is critical, and it always has been to the operating of the library, but I don't know how we're going to operate in the future. I don't even have any kind of a, you know, guesswork framework here. So I'm very uncomfortable, you know, just like a guess of, you know, all the extra help or half the extra help. I mean, it's hard without any guidance from, you know what I mean? We're operating when just the numbers here without the plan.
And I understand that. We tried to put together recommendations that would work within the framework that the commission approved for the budget, and retain as many staff as possible, retain as many services as possible, keep our collections viable and relevant for the community. This was our best recommendation here. If you would like us to go back and reconsider that, we can certainly do that. If you'd like to see more detail about the plan, we can certainly provide that. It is kind of it's in development at the moment, so we don't have anything firm that we can present to you. But rest assured, we are thinking about this every day. We are working on this every day. We're trying to get it to, I mean, it's been like nailing Jell-O to a wall, you know that. Yeah. But we're trying to get something that we can work with and that we can keep providing the best library services possible to our communities.
Could you, Anne, could you help us think about this, the first one about the extra help? Could you give us your opinion?
I think that if we freeze the use of all of our extra help, it's going to be very difficult through the coming year. We can do it, but it's going to be very difficult. It will certainly require hours. I think if we can hold on to at least some of our extra help, it will give us a lot more flexibility. We're still going to have to reduce some hours. I think that's just going to happen. So I would like to see us retain at least half of our extra help if we can work that out.
I think that's realistic. I can't imagine the library operating without extra help in any kind of a normal situation. So that would be your recommendation, Anne, would be to recommend the expenditure or putting aside money for half the extra help.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Anne.
And to retain all the staff, of course. Yes, I would agree with, I would support that.
Well, my concern is the commission voted on the June 1st meeting for the number.
Randall, you went on mute there accidentally, I think.
Well, my concern is the commission voted on the June 1st meeting for the framework that's on page 15. That's the 29,555 number. That's what the commission was comfortable with as projecting our revenue for the next fiscal year. Now, the fact that we may have 1.7 million of surplus from this year is a bonus. And if that actually occurs, adding that into the budget would be great. But other than that, any other changes is going to have to require the vote of the full commission. So I'm going to say 29,555 plus whatever revenue surplus we get in this fiscal year. And that's what we should start with.
Did we have these tax receipts that we didn't expect when we talked about it at the May meeting?
No. No, we did not.
We didn't have either one of these. So we got 859,000 and 723,000. We got $1.5 million more that we didn't know about in May. Is that right?
Yeah, about a week apart from
Yeah.
each other. Yeah.
Okay. So if, again, what you need is what to go to the county with, right?
Yes. And if what I need to go to the county with is the 29,555, then I will absolutely do that.
So we're only an advice, you know, we can only recommend, obviously, as Randall pointed out. I mean, and we've talked about before, the commission made a certain decision in May, but we didn't have all the information that we have now. Now we have another $1.5 million. And now we have another, you know, recommendation from the director, particularly. And I don't know how to exactly do this. I don't, obviously the commission is the deciding body, but we can recommend, you know, based on the additional information that we have now. So.
I feel okay. It seemed okay with the idea that the 1.78 million seems likely because we have the money in hand, and I think Jody's got a good sense of our current rate of expenditure. So if we don't end up with exactly that amount of money, I nonetheless feel it'll be pretty close. What I don't feel comfortable doing in this setting is approving the allocation of almost $1 million of the fund balance to supplement the budget, and that's the request. So
Right. No, I'm not asking you to approve that. I understand we are here, as I stated in our objectives earlier, to make recommendations to the commission when this goes before them in the July meeting.
well, is that going to be soon enough for you to, I mean,
It's not going to be soon enough for me to get what I need to get to the county so that our budget is posted and recognized. But we also can do budget adjustments if it turns out to be different.
do we, I guess my question, and I'm going to defer to everybody who knows more than I do about this, but would it be beneficial, or should we try to have a special session of the commission to, first of all, make them aware of the good news that there looks like there's additional funds that will be able to increase our revenue for next year by 1.78 million. And secondly, that we have a request from the staff to allocate $935,150 from an unassigned fund balance to cover additional staffing requirements that they anticipate.
Well, the only thing I would say at this point is we've never had to deal with this before. I mean, when we passed a budget in the past, there was never any of this kind of deadline because we had to go talk to the county and stuff. And, you know, and things are in flux like this. It's difficult to know. I'm not opposed to having a special meeting, let everybody know that. I wouldn't be opposed to sending out an advisory memo to the commission from the finance committee saying this is what's different, this is what we recommended. If you have any, you know, wish to have a special meeting, we can, but otherwise this is the information we're going to ask our CFO to go to the county with. Just maybe one way to go.
This is a very unusual time. It seems to me that if we're gonna, this is pretty important to send to the county. You know, does it matter that much in the long run to the county? Maybe not, but if we could tidy it up before it goes out there publicly, I think that would be wise, but we certainly don't have to do that.
Right. Well, county doesn't care. I mean, they're not involved.
Right.
They don't say yes or no or anything about it. It's just they're going to help us, you know, do the process of this. And so, but you know, we have better numbers now than we had when we had a commission meeting. So, I guess I'd kind of be in favor of having Randall draft a memo to all the commissioners and saying this is what came out of our meeting today. We have some, you know, better numbers, and this is our recommendation, and this is what we'll be working on until we get a chance to meet again, hear more about the plan and so forth. I don't think anybody would be terribly opposed to it, but I can't speak obviously for any other commissioners.
Okay, I see three possibilities. One is we stick strictly to the 29,555 number that the commission voted on. That's the first possibility. The second possibility is we take that number and we add in the projected 1.7 million of surplus from this fiscal year into that budget. That's the second possibility. And the third possibility is we go with the proposal in front of us where we're taking $600,000 or $900,000 from our fund balance. So those are the three possibilities, and I would like to do a straw vote on those. So Barbara, which of the three would you pick?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Anyway,
Somebody
Andy.
else go
This is-
ahead with me.
This is Thomas Hauser. I want to raise a question. We have sales tax for February, March. We don't have April sales tax, which should be arriving if they're back up to their normal schedule 2 months late during this current month of June.
Right.
So we potentially have another, if things work out, another month of sales tax that'll surprise us.
Right.
And I just want to put that in the mix of, okay, sales are way down. It's not going to be $1 million. And maybe it'll be 600,000 instead of whatever. So that's just a thought that's out there. And I think what Ann was saying is what she really wants to do is only halt half of the extra help. So I think really what they're saying is they want another $935,150 in the budget. So it's either we stick with what was approved in the July 1, or we go and say we want another $935,150 to come out of either unassigned fund balance or unreceived sales tax. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I like any of it, but it doesn't make sense.
Yes, Tom. Yes, it does.
Let me ask a question about this process with the county. So if we send Jody goes to the county with the latest commission decision from May, and then they load that into their system. I mean, how big a deal is it to then go back to not? I'm not sure exactly what the staff wants us to do in terms of we can only recommend again, but what if we don't recommend anything and then it goes through the commission in July, the commission decides something, and then Jody goes back to the county and say, change these numbers. Is that a big deal?
It is not.
Okay. That's the easy way to do it then.
Yeah, it's just a spreadsheet.
So, rather than get into this kind of sticky wicket of, we're advisory and we don't have time to go through the full commission before we change the numbers and all this stuff. I mean, a lot of other commissioners are going to have other questions, and I guess that would be my recommendation, is to just go with what you know now based on what the commission said in May, and then we'll change it, after we have our next meeting.
So you're saying just go with the 29.5 million that the commission voted on?
I think so. I mean, we know that everybody agreed to it, and it doesn't seem to matter. And again, it's not really in the county's, it's not their purview to do anything with it. They're just, building the system so they can, do what they do for us and the fiduciary responsibilities that they have. But the numbers are changeable.
Okay. Deborah, do you have an opinion?
Well, I would probably suggest that the committee recommend, in light of the change in the dollars that we have, and in light of the fact that the library management really recommends that we retain all of the staff. If we can do it, I'd say do it. But I certainly can understand the argument that that it's the full commission's responsibility. I do think that the full commission, generally speaking, knows that we have considered most possibilities during the finance committee meeting, and a commission oughtn't necessarily to rehash the conversation that one of the standing committees had. But so I'm certainly willing to be outvoted, but I think that we should go ahead with it.
With the
What
full,
does that mean?
With recommending that we acknowledge that we have additional dollars that we didn't know of, and so that with that money we can retain all of the staff and half of the extra help.
Yes, I think that's not quite, That's not quite the situation. I feel okay acknowledging that we have extra money we didn't know about. And I feel okay saying that we reviewed the proposed budget that was presented today and found it generally consistent with the framework, given the fact that we received more money. Where I become uncomfortable is I feel fine coming back to the full commission and saying we recommend that the commission approve an allocation of $935,150 from unassigned fund balances to meet additional staffing needs. I think we need commission approval to do that. I don't think we can allocate that as a finance committee. Am I, Barbara, am I wrong about that?
I agree with you. I think we really have two things here and we really ought to separate them. I think that we need to, one, make recommendations to the full commission based on these other decisions that we're talking about. But I think the document or the information that Jody takes to the county, it needs to be the information that the full commission agreed about. But I mean, we can do both these things, but I really think they're separate things the more we talk about it.
And I would be okay with that if it's, but I guess, Jody, I'm going to come back to you. Is it really not a big deal to resubmit? It seems to me that one year we got in trouble at the end of the year because we had overspent the budgeted amount, and that kind of wreaked havoc on some of our payables. Is it really not a big deal to resubmit to the county?
What would happen is that there's a multi-page spreadsheet that they have me fill out. The first of those would be predicting our revenue. The next would be all of the divisions in property tax, and then all of the divisions in sales tax. I wouldn't have to resubmit that if the commission approved something different than what I put in. It would just be a budget adjustment.
Because if it's not too much work for you, I would be fine coming back to the full commission, recommending that they approve the $31 million budget as outlined in this presentation, and asking for their allocation of the additional $935K from the fund balance to meet the need that Ann has laid out.
Yeah, I can live with that if it's not too much trouble.
It is not too much trouble.
So it's two different things. There's recommendations to the commission, and then there's taking the information of the county, which is what the decisions made at the May commission meeting.
Or the June 1st commission meeting, yes.
Right.
June 1st, yeah. Right. That's what I think we should do. So.
But I guess the question though is, you don't have a budget based on that framework, do you, Jody? You have this budget. So does that mean that you're going to have to go back and now redo all of the numbers to match the June 1 framework? Because that seems like a ton of work.
Yeah, I would have to make those cuts for the budget.
Okay,
But
this is Tom Hauser. I have a question here. Is it more trouble to have a special meeting, or is it more trouble to create this fake-o thing that none of us really thinks we're going to do?
Yeah. Can we get it?
How much work is it to have a special meeting on this one topic?
It's a fair amount of work. I mean, we can do it if that's the direction you'd like to go.
Well, I want you to figure out whether it's more trouble to have a special meeting or more trouble to fix it for Jody to come up with something that we fix later.
That would be a question for Jody. I don't know what it would take to put the budget back into the previous format. So she can answer that question, and then we'll know which one is the preferred way to go.
With the county process, the most important thing is that we get our budget posted.
so that it's in there, it's recognized, we know what we're estimating as our revenue, and we're estimating what we have as expenditures. Changing any of that after the fact is just a form that I would fill out in the EFS system.
Okay, but to be clear, and I think this is the point that we're going to have to get some agreement on, guys. Currently, what we're looking at here, all this work, which would serve as the basis for that budget, is not, it's not the $29 million that was approved as the framework on June 1. It's a revised budget based on the assumption that we have an extra 1.7 million. Now, if we could magically approve the 935K from the fund balance, you'd have to redo the budget again, right? Because you would have to bring in an additional $935,000 in revenue, and that would go into salaries and benefits. And there would be a fair amount of work. But if we say, yeah, let's go in with the framework budget, you're going to have to redo the budget to go back to the framework, and then you're going to have to redo it again to either come back to this or to come back to this plus the fund balances. That seems like a lot of extra work to me.
Jody, how detailed is the budget information that you have to give to the county? Do you have to do this, all this detail, or is it really just kind of basics like expected revenue and expected expenditures?
You have to fill in a line item budget.
Yeah.
It is line item budget, okay.
Yeah, and that's why we're looking. So that's why I personally would be okay voting to approve this budget with the extra 1.7 million and going back to the commission and saying, you know, we felt it was consistent with the framework. We had a high degree of confidence the revenue would be there. We were okay with that, and we have this additional request. But I'll go along with whatever the group feels is best here.
Okay.
I keep getting my mind changed. Jody, do you want to make a recommendation?
I'm fairly confident that we are going to have unspent revenue at the end of this year. Even if our revenues fall for the last quarter to where they were for March, we'll still be getting over 1.5 additional monies. But even without that, I'm confident that we will have unspent revenue by the end of this year that I would like to roll over primarily into services and supplies, because we have cost saving measures that we can employ in salaries and benefits that we don't necessarily have in services and supplies.
Okay, it's getting late. I want my dinner. So I would suggest that we do a budget based on the 29,555 plus the 1.7 million of projected surplus for this year. And we go with that for the first category. And then we will ask the commission to approve the additional $1 million or so for from the fund balance. So that's what I'm proposing.
This is Tom Hauser. I think we actually have to ask the commission to approve the 31 million versus the 29 million, just as semantics, and the additional 935,000 that the staff is asking for out of the fund balance.
Okay, so you're saying we should just go with the 29 million right now?
No, well, I think I'm distinguishing between what we're telling the county and what's approved, because we can't really approve the budget. We just can recommend. So I'm okay with telling the county anything. I don't care what they do. Just that we have to get the permission from the commission to do these two things we're talking about, taking 1.7 million and 935 million from here and there and whatever.
Okay.
And just one clarifying question, Jody. So when do you have to get this to the county?
Next Thursday.
Thursday. Okay. I don't know that we can do a meeting by Thursday. Okay.
Next Thursday,
No,
right?
and I'm kind of with Tom on this.
Mhm.
I could put in anything, and whatever the commission approves, I would then just go back and have to change it by, transferring funds or reducing the amount of revenue we're expecting, whatever that, it's an easy process to change.
Okay.
Okay.
So now we're back to, let's just use what the commission did in June. Is that what we're back to?
No.
Yes.
No. What we're back to, I think, is that Jody's going to use the line item she's got that she presented to us, so she doesn't have to redo the damn things.
Yes, that's what we
And
have.
then we're
Right.
going to recommend to the commission that we reallocate this unexpended tax money, and we reallocate it unassigned fund balance of 935,000.
But the key distinction here is that Jody can submit the budget even though it hasn't actually been approved by the commission.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And
And then
It's
are
kind
we-
of like dealing with the IRS. Don't tell them what's really happening.
Well, well, wait. If we do that, what is the sense that we should send an email out to all the commission, letting them know what we've done? Or just wait as part of the finance committee report in July?
well, I think it's not just a committee report because we're gonna be asking for a vote, right? This has to become an agenda item for the July meeting.
Right.
You have to
Right.
vote.
Yes.
Right. We do have to vote, but we're, as the committee would make a recommendation and then the vote on it. But do we feel that it's necessary for the other commissioners to know what we've decided today
I feel
Yes.
like it would-
before then?
Yeah.
I think that's a yes from the committee, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So, okay, I guess I know what we're doing.
Well, did I just lose Randall?
Oh,
There you go.
No, he's moving.
So,
I'm
Randall,
here.
are
I'm
you
still here. Okay, so we're going to suggest that Jody use what she just presented to fill in the forms for the county because we want a tight deadline for that. Then at the next commission meeting, we'll get them to discuss, approve, whatever, taking the projections of additional revenue and the fund balance, taking money out of the fund balance. Is that what we have decided?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, that's great. So if we go to the other items, Jody already said that the audit was almost finished.
Yes, I included in the narrative the two pieces that are outstanding, and I have a meeting this week,
Great.
the auditors, to just do some final cleanup.
Okay. We've already talked a lot about the fund balance in our previous discussion. So I guess we're down to what items to talk about next time. We'll probably be talking about the budget again, I'm sure.
Yes, and
Um,
I want to talk about, again, a revision of the fund balance policy. Let's be really thoughtful about the amounts and the categories and so forth.
Okay. So I have a question for Jody. When will you have the final numbers on this fiscal year? I doubt that it'll be by the next finance committee meeting, but I was just curious when.
It, it might be by mid-July, if we continue not to use our procurement cards. Procurement cards can hit the budget as far as 2 months later,
Okay,
which would skew the final numbers. But most of the expenditures will have attached to the budget in our system by mid-July.
Okay, so we can talk about that at the next Finance Committee meeting.
I'd also like to talk about the budget policy. It's, I think the last time it was approved was in 2010. And it could use some updating, I think.
I didn't know we had one.
We do.
There's a policy committee. Are they looking at that by any chance, or is this, does this
Not-
live in the Finance Committee?
Let's see. That's before I joined the commission, so that's really old.
No, actually Karen is the chair of the policy committee.
Well, that's
No, I
not a
meant-
policy
Isn't that
committee,
right?
that's, what do you call it? Oh, she does more like procedures, well, it's like standard operating procedure policy, which may be different. I haven't seen the budget policy. I don't know what it is. We used to have a timeline.
I haven't either.
I will send it to you all. It talks about, specific budget items in certain years of the budget, and that doesn't really belong in a budget policy.
Okay.
Okay, are we done?
Could I just say one more, I'm like an old song, but the next time I see this OPEB payments made to date report, I'd really like to have another category in there that explains what they are. So we don't have to constantly try to figure out which 750 is part of the 3 million and which part is part of an operating budget. So
I will block that out for you.
great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to call this meeting adjourned at 5:21. So thank you all for coming, and I want to thank all the visitors that were lurking in the background.
Hello, lurkers.
Hi, lurkers. So have a good evening.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Rachel.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Ann.
Thank you,
And Jody.
Randall.